Hi, I'm Chris. Today I'm going to be making a major claim that standardized testing is hurting American education. More specifically, high-stakes standardized testing in K-12 schools. For those of you who don't know what standardized testing, a more formal definition is given by the Glossary of Education Reform as a form of test that requires test takers to answer the same questions from a common bank of questions in the same way, and that is scored in a consistent manner to compare relative performance of individual students. This type of testing is labeled as high-stakes standardized testing, which is a test used to make important decisions about schools, educators, and students using incentives and punishments. High-stakes testing has been widely in effect since the No Child Left Behind Act implemented by President Bush in 2001, and since then has taken over the ideals of American education. At the initiation of this act, its intentions were part of an accountability movement to help education systems achieve better. But after almost 2 decades of being implemented in the system, it has failed to improve student achievement, is a political movement that does not focus on student education and reduces curriculum-based instruction time in the classroom, all of which ends up hurting the students in the long run. My first secondary claim is that standardized testing has failed to improve student achievement. According to the Program for International Student Assessment, the U.S. has dropped in world rankings in math, science, and English from 18th to 31st place within the last 5 years. Looking at these statistics, it's clear that since the implementation of standardized tests, the learning outcome of students has altered the trajectory of American education in a negative way. Students have not been able to consistently show or retain knowledge from standardized tests due to the fact that the tests do not affect their grades. Even though students are drilled year after year on practicing and taking these tests, according to the results, their learning outcome has changed for the worse. The issue with standardizing a test to determine a student's worth is that not all students are the same. It is unsound to compare one student to another simply based on a multiple choice test and determine whether one student is smarter than the other. This type of assessment is harmful to students who is constantly failing these tests and ends up believing that they are inadequate or too stupid to achieve higher education. My second claim is that standardized testing is a political movement and does not focus on students' education. Education reformers look at testing as a goal of learning rather than an instrument of measuring student understanding. This is very harmful for students because their intelligence is measured by how they can effectively take a test. In the latest data collection by the National Center for Education Statistics, 51% of students across the nation's public schools were considered low income. This affects the results of a standardized test because the test does not gauge the conditions of students taking the test. As a result, many students in areas of low income shut down because of students that do not produce effective scores to keep the schools open, which ultimately deem the students as dropouts and prevent them from seeking further education or higher education. Standardized testing is not preparing students for higher education or the real world. These tests do not measure the various qualities that make up a person, such as creativity, critical thinking skills, or imagination. Rather, the tests are a way of prioritizing government budget distribution, meaning it is used as a way to weed out the low-performing schools and to improve the higher performing schools. This leaves a majority of the students who are considered low income with another disadvantage when their schools are underfunded. My last claim is that standardized test preparation reduces teachers' instruction time. Standardized test preparation hurts students by taking away educational time. As a result of having yearly tests, a narrower academic program in schools is promoted since educators will often neglect instruction time in important subject areas like art, music, social sciences, and humanities, for example. This hurts the students who are passionate about these subjects and are in classes to learn about them, but are forced to learn about how to match certain answers with certain questions for a test. Teachers are encouraged to allot more than a quarter of the year's instruction time for test prep, Policymakers pressure schools to increase test scores, creating a chain effect where the principal pressures the teachers and the teachers pressure the students. And this forces the teachers to focus on topics most likely to be on the test rather than class-specific knowledge. This is called teaching the test, which means that teachers use curriculum time to train students using clone tests to prepare them for yearly assessment. In a 5-year University of Maryland study done in 2007, it showed that since the No Child Left Behind Act, declines in teaching complex assignments and high cognitive content in the curriculum has decreased. This is a direct example of how students miss out on valuable class time for the sake of standardized testing. In conclusion, standardized testing is hurting American education due to the 3 claims that I made. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, I can see where the argument's going. I do think the propositions identified, although the use of the term high stakes and standardized testing both need a little bit more definition. It might be a good idea to define those before you actually give us the proposition itself. There is a preview. It seems like you rushed through the preview, but I did hear that those points were going to be talked about. And then as you get to the individual points in the body of the speech, you did signpost those, so those were pretty clear. I think that the idea of the second point being a political movement sounds very strange if we're talking about it's harming the education system, because your argument actually should be that it's altering the way we finance the schools in a negative way. Forget the political stuff about it, because it really comes out to this argument that says we're trying to identify the high-performing schools and get rid of the low-performing schools, which I'm not sure why that's a bad thing, except that your inference seems to be that we're bailing out on the low-performing schools and we're not doing anything to improve them. And that's, I think, a big assumption that needs some proof. And like I said, I think that second point, the way you phrased it, makes it sound reactionary as opposed to focused on the particular issue that you actually developed. So I would change that. The first point suggesting that it hasn't really improved their learning. You've got a couple of pieces of evidence that you use here. Decline in the rating of the United States in comparison to other countries around the world in the last 5 years. I think that that's a good piece of information, although correlating it to standardized testing I think is a little bit problematic, since standardized testing has apparently been around a long time, at least since 2001 when No Child Left Behind went into place, and of course well before that in other contexts as well. So I think that you need to have some more data on that particular point, but I think that's the right kind of data to be looking at. It just feels a little bit underdeveloped. We've got a lot of explanations and a lot of assertions on the individual points, but the proof on it is, I think, unfortunately thin. Like on the third point, when you're talking about the amount of time that they spend on tests, they're allowed to allocate up to 25%. That sounds like it's a piece of factual data. I'm looking for a source on that. I didn't really get that. Teachers get pressured by the principals, and the teachers then pressure the students. I can see how that might be the case, but why they're being pressured is not not explained. And you need to kind of explain that there are like you said, on the second point, financial issues, it could be allocation of money, it could be evaluation of performances, that sort of thing. Are teachers going to get hired or fired, or principals going to be moved around or lose their jobs because of these tests? Is that what makes them high stakes? And that sounds like it's high stakes for the academics rather than for the students, which isn't really it's not an irrelevant point, but it's certainly not the one that you started off with. It seems like it's sort of a different kind of point. You had one piece of data about this that was from 2007, and that's 11 years ago, and I think we need some more recent data on that particular point. The assertion that the curriculum suffers because they're spending a lot of time on these issues, that's like a complete assertion. I'm not saying that it's not true, but I need to see some information. Have they cut, like you said, art programs or drama programs or other kinds of things that might be valuable to the students? The notion that these things aren't important, well, it depends on what's on the standardized test. If reading comprehension is on the standardized test and you say that doesn't prepare people for the real world, I'm sorry, reading is required for most people in the real world. If it's about a math issue, it's going to be required for most people in the real world. What you need to be telling me is that it's not moving us in the directions on those particular points. And I think we need more data on that. A lot of reading in the presentation, and how do I say this without, I don't want to sound snippy,
That's fine.
You sound a little bored, it's kind of a dry topic. I think most people would go, I don't know. But you're the speaker. You're trying to sell us on this idea.
Just a lot of stuff.
Yeah, get a little passion into your argument. Tell us why it's unfair. Not unfair, but why it doesn't work. And be firm about it. Don't be passive and bored by it. All right. Thank you.